Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to see you all here. I'm particularly happy to be sitting with all these friends and colleagues here at IIPP. When we started thinking about this roundtable, I never thought it was going to be so diverse, so stimulating, and I'm quite sure that the debate that we are going to have today is going to be inspiring for everyone here. So yeah, first of all, I want to thank you guys for being here. I am Cecilia Ricap, I forgot to say that. I am an associate professor in economics and the head of research of the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, which is where you all are right now. We are part of University College London. And although many of you may think that today we are going to present this report, which some of us wrote, and I'm sure that others have already read, also probably here in this room, this is not what we are going to discuss today, or yes, but in a different way. What we thought for today was to actually connect each other's research to the topic of digital sovereignty and why we think digital sovereignty is relevant. So I just wanted to start showcasing the report for those of you that may have not heard of it, and if you want to read it, or those of you who did read the report and came here hoping to ask us questions about the report, of course you will have time to do it. The aim of this talk will be to actually have a conversation. We will see how it goes because we're a lot on this side, but we will speak very briefly, each of us, and we will try also to connect, as I was saying, our research with the discussion about digital sovereignty, and then we will open the floor to debates, to all of you. We were supposed to have Matt Lawrence as the chair today. He is the executive director of Commonwealth, but he couldn't be here for personal reasons. So we have here Josh, who kindly agreed to replace him. He's not only part of IIPP, but also working on AI and digital sovereignty for Chatham House. So thanks a lot for being here. And as I was saying, I will stop sharing so that we forget about this. But again, it's totally open for everyone to ask us questions about that later on. And because I already have the mic, I'm going to start. And I'm going to go directly into the heart of what I want to discuss and share with all of you here today. I'm quite sure that everyone has seen those pictures from Trump's inauguration day. It became crystal clear for everyone, even my mom, that there is something going on in the world, that even though companies usually attend these ceremonies, the CEOs, the founders do not occupy the front seats. These are reserved for heads of other states, and instead of that, we saw not only Elon Musk, but also Jeff Bezos, Sundar Pichai, Mark Zuckerberg on the first row during Trump's inauguration day. To some extent, this coronates a history of the interplay between the US, big tech, and the US government, an interplay that, of course, has also its clashes, that it's not just a sort of friendly coalition, but at the same time, it is today a coalition that is ruling most of the world. And I say most of the world because we also need to think about how in China, a similar story can be told when we look at the relationship between Chinese big tech and the Chinese government. And this has different layers. It's not that the CEOs and founders of big tech companies were sitting there because they are rich. The fact that they are rich is a consequence of their power. We need to understand their power. And for some, this may just be that they were sitting there because they are the owners of the most used platform companies, because through their social media, social networks, the common senses, the agendas, the public agendas are defined, but this is the surface of the problem. This is only part of what's going on in today's capitalism. And as some of you may know, I've been looking at the networks of corporate power and how, in particular, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google control the whole digital technologies value chain. So not only platforms, not only concentrating data, but also concentrating the network of research that develops the technologies. So being able to control what questions are answered among also many others that are not part of these organizations. Think of universities, public research organizations. They also control the networks of startup companies and many other companies that end up being a sort of periphery around established core. And this dynamic of a established core, a core dominated by a few players, but at the same time surrounded by thousands of companies, to some extent is complicated to understand from a policy perspective, because there seems to be competition, whereas in fact what we are living is within a planned economy. But those planning the economy are corporate giants. And they are doing it through digital technology. So in every sector, more and more leading corporations are becoming dependent on digital technologies in order to plan their own global value chains. These technologies are not only general purpose technologies, they are also control technologies. And they serve to, for instance, control for military purposes. They also serve to control workers in the workplace, and they also serve to control other companies in global value chains, for instance. So every leading corporation in the world is also becoming more and more dependent, in particular on Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, because they control the cloud. And the cloud is not only the place where algorithms are, or AI models are trained, but it's or where we store our pictures. The cloud is the place where every digital technology is being produced, exchanged, and consumed. And because these technologies are so important and so essential for everything, even also for governments' everyday business, and for fulfilling every individual as well as organization needs more and more, even these technologies are becoming a method of invention. So new knowledge is produced with data and AI algorithms. Because of all these reasons, what happens when we see a few companies controlling these technologies is that it's not only other companies being subordinated, it's not only that our perceptions are shaped and controlled by a few companies, but also our societies, our democracies are undermined by the power of these companies. And this is why, for me, the topic of digital sovereignty became so important, because it directly speaks about democracy, it directly speaks about what type of world we live in and what type of world we could be living in. And for most of the world, at least for those that are not in the US and China, this should be a extremely important question, and this is why we collectively started thinking about how can digital sovereignty could look like if we think of it from an ecological, international perspective for the people, then by the people, and also taking the planet into account. So with all this, I again want to emphasize that we have an amazing panel and that I'm looking forward to all our discussions, and I will give the floor to Ed Milson, who will continue this discussion.
Okay, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks for the ones organizing this amazing panel. I'm Ed Milson Paraná. I'm associate professor in the Department of Social Science at LUT University in Finland. And I've been working for years now with digital finance, the overall digitalization process of financial systems, cryptocurrencies, and more recently how it touches and crosses AI, synthetic data, and the likes. And from this perspective, from the financial angle, it's easily and interesting to see how through finance, not only there is this kind of future building, world makings that is constantly interplayed between big finance and big tech, and how this coordination process, it's organized through different scales, right? From the regulatory process to the niche technologies to the process overall. So finance, it's about risk management in society and coordination between different sectors. And from this angle, it's quite clear that we need, if you want to tackle the problem, the very problems that Cecilia just raised, a kind of a more encompassing, coordinated, integrated, holistic approach to these problems. For many years, we have been approaching this from the standpoint of regulation, from specific technologies, specific frameworks. And the whole talk about sovereignty and digital sovereignty that we want to advance further here is also to use this political momentum in a sense where it becomes quite clear the problems of this current setup to offer a different agenda. That's how we started this manifesto and this report that most of us work together around here. And that's why this panel is mostly thought of. So I'm really happy to be part of it, to this great, amazing group of scholars to think through how can we escalate also the solutions beyond the critical analysis, the political, in my case, the critical political understanding of this process, going beyond the particular fields of application and research and critique that we've been putting along across this year. So thanks again for having me, and looking forward for the discussion.
Hi, thank you very much for the invitation. Ros Pujadas, and I'm a lecturer in digital innovation at UCL, Department of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Public Policy. For me, digital sovereignty is one way of thinking about digital governance. And by digital governance, I've been interested both in the way digital technologies are governed, but also the way by which platforms and digital infrastructures or information infrastructures are forms of governance. So if we think about the dream, if you like, of the open internet as a new form of bottom-up form of governance, we can see that that has evolved as a form of digital governance, for instance, in the US, of non-intervention, very much free market, with a logic that is libertarian. And that has resulted somehow in this powerful growth of corporations. Also, we know the dynamics of digital platforms through network effects. So, I think the concerns are coming on other nations, this sense of the imposition of this, as Cecilia was explaining, of these corporations in our nations or in our societies. And digital sovereignty has been put forward as an alternative model by which not only the market or the businesses are governing, regulating, ruling issues such as markets, but also even how information and communication is shared, even the discourse, so with effects in democracy. So digital sovereignty has been presented as an alternative. And of course, it has been presented as an alternative in also authoritarian, very centralist states, by which then it's another form of centralized control. And then we could think that we're moving from a form of centralized control to yet another form of centralized control. And I guess what I'm interested in the topic of digital sovereignty is thinking about sovereignty as the autonomy of the citizens, so the sovereignty in terms of democratic sovereignty, and therefore the duty of the state as well of other institutions, supranational institutions, to ensure the democratic values and also the rights of citizens. And in that sense, for me, digital sovereignty is not only a matter of thinking, which is important, but it's not only a matter, it has frequently been framed in terms of allowing for competition, competitiveness, and also issues of security, so issues that have to do with the relationship between states, but also it's about thinking more internally about how to, for instance, have policies that encourage the development of technologies that are aligned with the values, the democratic values and the protection of rights.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paolo Jeraldo. I'm senior researcher in social science at Complutense University. And following the lead of the previous two interventions, I would really like to reflect a bit on what I think is the paradox of digital sovereignty. I think it is a very paradoxical phrase, a very paradoxical concept, but which speaks to dilemmas that our societies are currently traversing. Why is it paradoxical? Because sovereignty, the definition of sovereignty, is a territorial notion. It bespeaks the spatial power of the state over a given territory. Fundamentally, can be translated as supremacy, but supremacy not of race, supremacy of power, of political power. The idea is that there is one power in a given territory, and that's above any private power and any competing religious power or political power, and so on and so forth. To the contrary, we know that digital technology is not very territorial. It tends to flow like globally. It's very global in nature. I mean, this in a way reminds us of what Karl Marx was saying of technology. In a contribution to a critique of political economy, he famously said that technology is a world fact or a world historical fact. What that means is that once a technology is introduced, it spreads all over the globe because capitalism leads it to spread, because it increases efficiency, and every capitalist wants to have the best technology and the best efficiency. So it is a globalizing, a universalizing force, technology per se. Yet at the same time, we see now tendency towards sovereignty that are often can be translated as fundamentally a demand for self-reliance, self-control, autonomy, in the extreme even forms of techno-nationalism, right, which are in evident contrast vis-a-vis this universalizing character of technology. So why is this happening? Because people, states, governments, they are realizing that technology is not just technology, right? Technology is an instrument of economic power and political power at a time when the two types of power are increasingly interrelated with one another. So I think the key question, if we want to address the question that is in the title of this event, how do we get there, is really solving this paradox, this contradiction between territory and technology, right? And there are different ways. I mean, there is a most obvious autarkic way, basically to bring back territory and technology, only technology produced within a certain territory. That would be basically the Trump, say, blueprint for digital sovereignty, but it's not really his blueprint, because his blueprint is more imperialism. US technology in the US and all over the world, right? Another blueprint would be a sort of globalist response, just one global technology for everyone. But I think that crashes against other considerations, the fact that there are different polities. And a third one, that perhaps is the most realistic one, which is more of a federative, collaborative, more regional, ultimately more multipolar digital sovereignty, where there is a recognition that for all the international collaboration that we want to establish, there's also ultimately the need for different regional systems where there is collaboration across different states that perhaps because of their scale wouldn't be able to have their own sovereign system in their borders.
Thanks, Aloo. I kind of picked up a really interesting thing you said about technology as a source of power, and the fact that it is not just a nationalistic endeavor. This can't be translated to one particular region or location. None of this is more apparent than sort of saying that technology would not exist, in this case artificial intelligence, without the global south or the countries of the global south. That's kind of my intervention into it. My name is Amir. I teach at the University of Edinburgh, where I'm based at a School of Social and Political Science, and I teach primarily international development. My long-standing concern over research has always been about technology and the role of large tech firms and the ways in which they shape our economy and politics. The issues around power they sort of exert to control value and extract value from the global south, so to speak. I've recently started a very large project that looks around the ways in which AI gets made from different locations in the global south. The project is called as Planetary AI. In particular, it looks at the production networks or the value chains through which two of the realms of AI that are really crucial for us to understand, and this is where the connection to digital sovereignty comes into play. One of them is the ways in which human labor gets embedded into the production of AI, data work as we call it, right? So anything between Colombia to Chile to South Africa to India and Philippines, there are lots and lots of thousands of workers training artificial intelligence. At the same time, the second aspect of the project that I'm currently leading on, it looks at the environmental and the ecological cost in the production of AI tools, ChatGPT, things that we use ordinarily on our daily lives, laptops, phones, are inherently material in nature, and all of them brings a lot of the cost. One of the things that I'm looking at is the infrastructures behind it, cloud computing, data centers for this speak. And these infrastructures are as much as we would know they are about energy, power, electricity in this case. There is a lot of environmental costs behind it. And at the same time, both these things, they exert control over multiple things or kind of multiple aspects of the global south region. And to me, one of the things to look at it is not only they exert control to extract value, but they are also resisted by the people in these communities. So one of the things that I'm studying is to look at the resistance that is emerging against these kind of sort of adaptation and penetration of artificial intelligence sort of tools in the global south. And perhaps in this case, what I would like to make an argument here is that digital sovereignty is not predetermined. It can be made, it can be remade. And in order to understand this thing, we need to study the ways in which people react to it or come up with different kinds of ideas which might be geographically or historically contingent. And for us, studying as part of the report that you saw that we drew up earlier is to look at the different notions of the roadmap that we have developed, how these roadmaps are being adapted or not adapted in what part of the world, and how do we actually study it in the long term. So that's my sort of contribution. I'm looking forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, and that's, I think, a great connector to what I do. My name is Carla Bonina. I'm currently associate professor at Surrey Business School. I also work with global development. So empirically, my research is based in Latin America, where I try also to study a lot of the things you were mentioning already. I guess I don't use necessarily a framework of digital sovereignty in the political science term, but my work has always been driven by a broader research question, that is, how can emerging technologies, including data, digital platforms, AI, can contribute to a better world for billions? And my work, my background also comes very much from a very socio-technical view, where nothing of this is inevitable, including AI or including these governing frameworks that we may be trying to impose. So in particular, one of my pieces of research which I crafted together with a colleague, Annabelle Gower, has to do with competition. So we looked, and this was partly a commission work by the World Bank in 2 years ago. We tried to look at responses, especially on digital platforms, to competition in the Global South. And what you see is that there's different responses to different types of platforms, whether they are transaction or more hybrid. Without going into detail into the typology, what you can see is that there is very little fines or blockages, in part because of the lack of coordination of what you see in the Global South. A lot of them has to do with very peculiar sector like transportation, accommodation, a lot of taxi, associations getting against Uber with no consequences from the competition authorities. And this is also linked to part of what I see sovereignty not at the national level, but much more at the regional level. You see what is so-called a Brussels effect. That is something very much, key in these days' work that I do in policy, that is related to this global view of technologies. When you study digital platforms, precisely what you cannot get is these borders, right? And that has positive effects, because the role of the European Union in crafting regulations means they go beyond boundaries. When Facebook or Meta has to comply with privacy regulations, they don't select, I'm going to do this in Argentina and only that in Europe. So in part, when you look at the Global South, regulator of the size of the European Union also becomes a global regulator. So part of what we're looking these days in my work with colleagues has to do with, how can regions, especially in Latin America, can work much more as a bloc, very much aligned with your opening and how we see this digital empire battle at the moment, and can work much more hand-to-hand with like-minded regulators, being, more human rights-based approach like the European Union, and a lot of this that is being the case in Latin America. So in my sense, my work is very applied, very impact-driven or policy-driven. So I'm very interested in how we can, for example, get down into actions a lot of the points that, for example, you discuss in the manifesto. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Fausto. I'm a researcher here at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, and I also study power. I would like to discuss what is the reason why we haven't managed to check for this concentration of power rising. As Carla mentioned, competition policy, the role of competition policy should be that of keeping the power in check. So what went wrong? The problem is that I think the understanding of power of economists and as a result of policymakers is kind of outdated, because it is based on the idea of market power. We understand power as market power, which is the ability to raise prices above a benchmark, a competitive benchmark. And that requires a market definition, which is the definition of a group of products that serve the same purpose. they are substitutable. And by definition, that neglects products that are different from each other, and therefore interdependencies between products. However, much of the power today comes exactly from the fact that products speak to each other. They are interdependent. So you can't really look at the power, the importance of Call of Duty without looking at the importance of Xbox. They are all interconnected. So this is a little bit what I've been looking at in my research, whether it is possible to start from the interdependency between products that are traditionally considered as belonging to different markets, and use these interdependencies to build a network, a web of complementarities. And once you have a network, there might be a way to find the most important nodes in this network, the bottlenecks. So I've devised this measure of power called bottleneck power, which exactly identifies those products that act as the most important nodes in the industry network. The idea is simple. You can, if you have a mobile app on your phone, the functioning of the app depends on many things, including, for example, the connectivity, the underlying infrastructure. So then if you are considering the economic importance of, internet undersea cables, that is a function of that software app on your phone. So everything is interconnected. And that's a very important perspective to have in mind when considering what are the most important products in our economy and why certain products are able to extract so much value. So the importance of this perspective is exactly also this. From a competition policy point of view, holding a bottleneck is an acute form of economic dependency. And therefore, if you hold a bottleneck, you can extract a lot of value. So that's a competition policy concern. But also from an industrial policy point of view, bottlenecks are a strategic vulnerability. Bottlenecks sometimes lead to failure because there are points in the system where a single element threatens the fragility of the system. I mean, a clear example was the glitch that happened in last August in CrowdStrike, the security system that Microsoft used, that because of a simple glitch, it kind of led to multiple systems becoming basically not able to function. So multiple hospitals had to shut down operations and lots of flights were canceled just because of one bottleneck. And then also, depending on the circumstances of the bottlenecks, some of these products are strategically important for the well-functioning of democracies because sometimes they sit at a specific position that allows them to manage the flow of information in a way that is really important. So given that, as we have seen, as has already been mentioned by the others here, we have seen how the management and the governance of these bottleneck platforms sometimes is influenced. Actually, we have seen that it's really influenced by the political cycle of certain specific countries. There is also a question of legitimacy, whether that political cycle should influence democratic processes of other countries. So it is also very much a question of technological sovereignty. I think that it's a good idea to come up with new tools to understand power and check where this is coming from.
Thanks. There's a lot of things to talk about. I'm Matthew Cole. I'm an assistant professor of technology work and employment at the University of Sussex, and I'm a co-I on the Digital Futures at Work Research Centre ESRC grant at Sussex and Leeds and Cambridge. I'm working on a number of different things. I mainly focus on labour and the political economy of work and the ways in which technology interacts with that. But as part of this research, I'm also looking at governance of digital systems and the ecological impact, which obviously dovetails quite nicely with some of the topics that we're discussing here. And when I think about digital sovereignty, it's kind of hard for me to conceptualize it in terms of labor, because that's often at like a meso or a micro level in terms of sociology of work. But I also come from a political philosophy background, so it can start in the more abstract, which is, what is sovereignty? Sovereignty is the power to decide, right? In the first instance, right? But you have different levels of that power of decision, states, nations, right? We had more power to decide when there were more controls on capital, right? Pre, 1970s and all of that. The power to decide gets eroded as the multinational capital becomes freer, right? And you don't have as many checks. Same when it comes to the power of workers to decide, or the power of citizens to decide whether or not you want a data center next to your house instead of a school because there's not enough water or power, or whether or not you want to decide if Microsoft Teams will govern your entire working existence and all of your training data or activities that you perform via these tools, or the Bluetooth functions on your phone are sent off to enrich the tech oligarchs of the United States, right? Having the power to decide over your data, over the platforms that you use, whether or not those platforms are operating in your country, is a multi-level analysis. And so the concept of digital sovereignty is bound up with, political, economic, industrial sovereignty. And I think trying to first schematize these relationships is, I think, a key task for us, but also I think because of our multiple levels of expertise, we can start to unpack what that means. But I do think digital sovereignty needs to be thought at these different levels of abstraction and in the relationships of having the power to decide individually, collectively, industrially, nation or regionally, is incredibly important for the future of, I guess, democracy, right? But also of our planet and ecological issues. So I think that's a kind of good transition maybe to Anna.
Okay, so last but not least, I hope that I'm gonna catch some of the attention here because I'm the last one. So for me, digital sovereignty is about giving power to the people to decide. As I've been investigating, for instance, data centers in Mexico, and they are being concentrated in a state where they don't have water, and they have a lot of droughts. And then I could see and I could witness how these people, they don't have sovereignty, so they can't decide that the data centers are going to be located there. Every time that I was invited to give a talk about what happened in Mexico, people were very depressed because I was explaining what was happening there. And people were very sad and very pessimistic, and they were like, what can I do individually? So then I moved to my next stage in my research, which is okay, let's propose something that is positive, optimistic, and people don't get depressed because, capitalism and neoliberalism, and we don't have sovereignty. So then I found out that Microsoft wants to open a nuclear power station in the US to power a data center, so basically to run more AI algorithms. And then I connected that with an event that happened in 1979. And what happened in that nuclear station was that there was an accident. And people panicked, the local state panicked as well. That station is 3 Mile Island, so you can check on Wikipedia. And they have to evacuate the area, so a lot of women, children, they have to escape. And then I found this connection, right? Microsoft wants to open that station that created that accident. And not only that, that accident created the first time in the US that women came together and decided to propose ecofeminism. And they organized the first ecofeminist conference in the US. So then I found this historical event as an opportunity to bring ecofeminist debates into artificial intelligence. Because as Amir and others have said, we have here a problem regarding AI environmental costs. So you can also check online that because the paper has been, it's going to be published in the ACM Fairness Conference, so it's basically the main conference in ethics and AI. And I propose 7 principles that, will guide us, hopefully, to develop artificial intelligence that takes into account ecofeminist values. You might think, like, how can we do that? I think that there are like ways to do that. So as I say, there are like 7 principles. The first principle is challenging power. The second principle is be aware of supply chains. We need to be aware about the materiality of artificial intelligence. And another principle that for me is also important is to bring digital sovereignty back to the discussion, right? And I connect that also with the commons. Because I think, like, as like people, we lost sovereignty when we lost the commons, all right? When we lost access to rivers, public access to rivers, public access to land that we could use for our own benefit. And we have, like, also, like, this connection with the history of, like, Britain, right? That other people might be able to also, like, explain. So basically, yeah, I wanted to come here and talk about this optimistic perspective about how we can, develop artificial intelligence from ecofeminist lens. And I also say that because I didn't introduce myself, but I'm a lecturer in AI, government and policy at the Oxford Internet Institute. And my background is in computer science and mathematics. So I've been coding algorithms. I know how to code AI. But then I realized that coding AI are not gonna change the world for, like, to make the world better for future generations. So I shift towards, like, more critical social science and try to see how we can develop artificial intelligence and other sort of technologies that can actually improve our societies or bring, like, benefit to our societies. So that's everything.
Okay, thanks a lot, everyone. I will now give the mic to Josh, who will have this complicated task to make sense of all this, ask us some questions, and then open it to everyone. I will pass you this mic because this works for the people online. This is why it doesn't amplify our voices here. And it's not that we are training ourselves for Eurovision or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Only that.
Great, thank you. Such an easy task. All right, thank you, everyone. Hi, I'm Josh Hensminger. I'm one of the PhD students here at IAPP, and it was very fascinating hearing everyone's very unique perspective. I wanted to capture a little bit of the energy of the last comment to simply ask, and maybe this is a bit of a cop-out, what are you optimistic about? A lot of you articulated some of the very heavy concerns, particularly around uncertainties on the organization and the structure of power, how to effectively mobilize under these conditions, the reality of, the global liberal digital order and the realities of this. What are you optimistic about?
If I can take that invitation because you will of my intervention. So for me, it's optimistic. So I have, like, this optimism towards our society because, for instance, in Spain, we have one of the first grassroots organizations that is challenging data centers in Spain. It's called Tu nube seca mi río, that it's translated as your cloud is drying my river. And they are in touch with other organizations, other people in Marseille to build grassroots organizations also there facing and challenging data centers. So that's my optimistic note on that.
I can say that I'm optimistic about the people here in this room. I'm optimistic because I more and more find out about more colleagues doing interesting stuff to, first of all, uncover all these networks of power, also try to understand why it's relevant and how we can change it. So I think that and the fact that so many people contributed to the Reclaiming Digital Sovereignty report, the process that led us to that report, that in case you don't know about it, it was written after working together online and sending individual and collective contributions over a couple of months. And then some of us centralized that and came up with the final version. I'm also optimistic because I see both in progressive leftist governments in Latin America, as well as among not only the left, the Greens, and the Social and Democrats, but also sometimes even conservatives at the European Union level, not at the level of Labour here, for instance, but at the EU level, I do see some interest and some space to bring all this debate into the policy spaces, and that they are listening and hearing, and that they want to do something about it. Sometimes with, of course, from the conservative side, there will not be the same type of agreements, but I still think that there is a space, and there is a space also to push because of all this knowledge that we've been accumulating about how this works. It's a very complex system. There are many things that are for which old tools backfire. So we, as scholars, and together with civil society organizations, advocacy organizations that have also been working on this, we have a unique opportunity to push for concrete transformations at the level of the state. So I'm a full advocate for grassroots movements, but I also think that we need to make states accountable, and there is an opportunity to do that.
I might be a little bit less optimistic, but there is one particular thing that I'm really optimistic about, which is that artificial intelligence cannot replace the power of our minds. It doesn't matter the level of advancement that there is, and that kind of builds up on the earlier points that are being made in the energy and the idea that when we meet people who are on the same platform, to think that there is a way we could change it. The resistance that is emerging on the local communities and the ways in which they interact with it, it kind of makes us question whether there is the kind of ability that people assume the technology has to overcome our social and political sort of ecosystem, so to speak. It meets at certain point that kind of barrier, and that barrier emerges from these kind of movements and the minds that actually try and think about the ways in which we challenge authority or power. But whether that achieves in the real term, that's where I'm less optimistic about it.
Not sure how to say this. I'm sort of optimistic about the Trump period. And
please explain that.
I'll tell you why. Because we are seeing the delegitimation of the American hegemony and imperial norms, right? Trump is ruining that relationship for the United States through the tariffs, through the trade wars. And that's an opportunity for a more multipolar world, which is ultimately better for everyone except the United States, probably, right? When you have the crumbling of that kind of imperial hegemony and digital imperial dominance, you have a space that opens up for alternatives, whether they're European or Latin American or the global South as a whole. There is opportunity there for an alternative. So
that took my point. I fully, but not in that sense. But to me, this is precisely why I'm optimistic at the moment, because in the past, we saw a lot of this power very much hidden and very well constructed. And these days it's very obvious how this is unfolding. And at least, for example, for countries in regions I'm very interested in, like Latin America, it's like, oh, so you didn't care about that, or you don't care about that. So that is the opportunity I see, and that is also my reasons to be optimistic of this much more serious awakening that perhaps we haven't seen before.
In a very brief note, I would just add that one point to be optimistic about in terms of the political momentum, the political mood overall, is the fact that the idea that govern basically every intervention about internet and data space and digital space as a whole, it was a kind of exceptionalism, right? I mean, that the usual rules don't apply, the industrial policy don't apply, that kind of regulation don't apply. In a sense, of course, there is lots of specificities that must be taken into account, and we have devoted most of our work to do that. But on the other register, on the other level, people are quite clear now that this is end. I mean, this exceptionalism is over, and we need to do something about it. We have to act upon it. And across the political spectrum, of course, this varies a lot in terms of what kind of alternatives we should pursue. There is a call for alternatives. There is a call to building new tech capacities. And in our side, of course, I'm sure this unites us here, a kind of building up of tech capacities that are governed by the people, for the people, that are kind of public-oriented and democratically regulated and so on. And I do see there's a major opportunity for us to push further this agenda, to act upon it, and to create even bigger momentum to do something about it. So this means a lot in terms of finding some optimism around there.
Yeah, I think the reasons for optimism have been outlined already. I mean, I think I'm optimistic because the darkest moment is the one just before dawn, as the proverb said. In a sense, I mean, we should just kind of realize the scale of the challenge we are in and the pit we find ourselves, especially in Europe. I mean, I saw this stat that all the digital companies of the EU are less than Apple in revenues and market value. I mean, we should just realize the scale of the challenge. I think that we need a lot of optimism and utopia, but also we need to realize how much the road to digital sovereignty is strewn with failed promises. Because there's been a lot of chat, especially in Brussels, with insufficient funding and very voluntaristic projects that have not gotten anywhere because they were not at scale, simply. You cannot fund 1 billion to take on AI. No, I mean, 1 trillion or whatever, but it's not just the money. I mean, it's more generally the societal effort. And I think also realizing that perhaps it's not only the money or the effort, but you also, at this point, Europe finds itself, you also need stronger policy measures, including perhaps some forms of protectionism. Prohibition of certain uses of US technology if you really want to get rid of dependency. But I think there are some reasons for optimism at the end, because, I mean, awareness is important. We don't see anymore these companies as benign, as at some point we saw them, but between that and action, there's still a big gap.
Just a very quick comment. Well, they say that the old world is dead and the new world was not born yet. That's an optimistic way of looking at it, and that's fair enough. The truth is that we know that maybe the old world is over, but it is not to be taken for granted that a new world order will emerge soon. As a cautionary note, I think that the most realistic outcome in the coming years will be just chaos. And while it might be unnecessary chaos to get out of a sort of hegemony that had many drawbacks, it doesn't mean that it's going to be pleasant for the foreseeable future. So sorry to destroy the note of optimism, but yeah.
No, thank you again. And to pick up on kind of the last comments, to have a running theme, you articulated sovereignty at a variety of levels, but where a lot of this is being decided is at the level of national authority. And right now, particularly in the space of AI, there's a lot of concerns around a fear of what everyone else is doing, leading to hundreds of billions of dollars in investment for sovereign AI strategies. The other side of it, however, is what you've all talked about, which is, while the US may be retreating, US firms likely will not be retreating. What's your recommendation, or what would you ask national policymakers to take more seriously in specifically the next 2 years? While we're navigating kind of the realities of the Trump administration, what would you like them to be exploring more, be experimenting with more at the level of policy to, for lack of a better expression, reclaim digital sovereignty?
Well, I might start now. Something that I would keep in mind is that big mistake I think the US is making is pushing this narrative that in order to be so competitive, they just need to let loose the free spirits of the free market, and they're going towards this sort of libertarian, hyper-capitalistic nightmare. And in all these, they're also adding a little bit of racism, a little bit of sexism. They're really kind of pushing for a society that I think the majority of people don't want. So I think that if we are to be competitive, like non-Americans, I mean non-US people, I think that it would be wise to realize that actually a source of competitive advantage is to build a world that is more sustainable for everyone, rather than chasing them towards this vision?
Plus one to that, definitely. I think that there is an opportunity to, instead of trying to chase and catch up with the US or China, which actually it's unfeasible also. So it's not only something that shouldn't be done, but it's anyway unfeasible. And what could be done instead is to think about the development of science and technology differently and to make it much more democratic, much more inclusive. And if you think, for instance, concretely about AI, one associated policy, AI models cannot be developed with a Horizon project. They cannot. They need hundreds of people working together. And if we want to produce them differently, it means that we not only want the AI scientists and engineers to be sitting on the table, but also representatives from unions, from the civil society, social scientists, people expert on AI ethics, on the political economy, the representatives from the governments. This is people and more people that need to be sitting together, discussing together, working together for longer periods of time than what it takes to write a paper or apply for a grant. So definitely, I think that there is an opportunity to rethink about how science is produced, and that requires imagination at the level of institutions. We need different institutions for producing knowledge, for sharing that knowledge afterwards. And that's one thing. But then at the concrete level of, okay, this will take time. What do we do in the meantime? And also, I think going back to this long-term vision of a different way of producing science is a way to do it, being much more conscious of the ecological boundaries at the same time, and doing it together and doing it internationally. But on the more immediate part, again, doing it together internationally and ecologically, one of the things that we include in the report and that I think is overlooked by every single government is what I was mentioning before about the cloud. That the cloud is not only infrastructure as a service. It's not enough to build AI factories or gigafactories, because companies, in the best case scenario, will train their models on these AI factories and then will go and sell them as a service on Amazon, Microsoft, and Google Cloud. So it will be even worse, because the European Union will be doing part of the job for free to continue enforcing the status quo. So that's not the type of policy that we should be aiming for. We should replace, going back to what Fausto was saying, we need to find the bottlenecks and replace them. And we have already found them. The cloud is a bottleneck, not only because of infrastructure as a service. It is a bottleneck because it is the territory, going to what Paolo was saying, it is the space where digital technologies are produced, exchanged, and consumed. So we need an alternative space to produce, exchange, share, not only exchange in the market, and consume digital technologies. And this can be public-led. States could cooperate together to develop this technological infrastructure and could also procure in order to be less technologically dependent.
There is no easy way to put this thing, what I'm going to say, right? And I'm going to get slaughtered after this. I think as scholars and public or intellectuals or common sort of general people, I think at some point, including policymakers, we have to ask ourselves a question: is AI necessary for our lives? And in this case, by extension, certain forms of technology that we kind of are becoming dependent upon. Increasingly to the point that I realized recently, that you want to go to a point A to point B, you need a Google map to find directions to the city that you have grown up in, right? And I think what I'm trying to get to this by this kind of an anecdote is the idea that if we are facing some of the things that we talked about earlier, ecological catastrophe and the kind of breakdown of social and political norms that we live in, there might be a case where we have to seriously question at the levels in which it is penetrating our systems, and how do we actually get out of it to gain some of the control, which goes back to the point you're talking about. We're talking about at national level. And what I'm actually asking is to break it down more subnational level, communities, urban neighborhoods sort of level, where individual level. How do we gain some of these things back? Maybe there is an effort to push back against the things that they keep throwing down our throat, that we have to update our phones, right? Otherwise it won't work. Get yourself a new one every 2 years, that kind of thing.
I would like to answer Amir a question about do we need AI? And I'm gonna explain two cases that happened again in Spain. The first one was in October, we had a horrible episode regarding climate change. 228 people died because we had this rain. And so as I say, a lot of people died. I have friends that were affected by that. And AI was not a solution. AI was not a tool that was helpful. Then the second episode happened a few weeks ago. I don't know if you hear that we had an issue with electricity in Spain. We have blackouts. Where was the AI? Was it helpful? So that's what I think we need to tell our policymakers, that we really need to think whether AI is necessary for the climate crisis. Because as we are seeing here and we are putting on the table, it's rather part of the problem. And I also would advocate for like more participatory processes. So we need to bring people and decide which kind of technology they do want. Because if you ask them, they don't see AI as a priority. They rather see, like, for instance, improved digital bureaucracy, like in Spain, is a nightmare. So put money into this infrastructure, and also like try to end this technological dependency with clouds. For instance, I think most of us, we are academics in the UK. Our emails go through Microsoft, right? And I remember when I was a PhD back in Spain, my university had its own cloud. So we need to come back to that.
Yeah, I mean, my advice for any policymakers would be to have a bit of political courage. I mean, I think it's just really surprising to me, even at European level, let alone this country, which is basically a vassal state of the United States. Then there's no political courage and there's no political creativity. And, you know, much of that was purposefully destroyed over the past few years. But many of us who were active, at least during the Corbyn years or otherwise, still have a lot of ideas around how to regain digital sovereignty and political sovereignty. And I'm sure there are people throughout Europe who also have similar ideas, but the idea that it's not being sort of incentivized or even theorized, I think, in the maximalist way that perhaps we've presented it here, and asking the question, do we need this? Like, I don't need an AI assistant on WhatsApp. Like, I don't want it. I don't. Like, it's kind of crazy that everyone's just accepted, like, oh, AI will lead to the productivity revolution, as if it's somehow different than Bitcoin mining, which in terms of social costs versus use, it's basically on the same level, right? So I think, yeah, have a bit of political courage, and everyone else who has access to policymakers and otherwise, push beyond what you think is the sort of consensus around digital sovereign, or, well, even the idea of digital sovereignty hasn't occurred yet to, I think, most people in EU policymaking circles. So maybe we'll put it more on the agenda.
Push it down there.
Exactly. Yeah.
One additional point that I think it's when Fausto was talking about bottlenecks, of course there is the bottlenecks from the point of view of different industries, and this in particular, digital services overall, but one might maybe escalate this also to societal level. And this I would think would be a very good starting point for policymakers, going back to political economy 101 and say, well, you have land, you have capital, you have labor. And here, this is the starting point to deal with this problem. Again, we have environmental issues here that crosses basically everything we do in our lives, and everything we produce also goes through labor. So we must start from these two aspects. And on top of that, of course, put capital in check, right? Control the flows of finance and money that in the last 50 years we made basically treated beyond internet and data as exceptions, finance as another big exception to the overall social, political, judicial, legal environments and realms. And this is, I think, boils down to political courage, to speak kind of the plain language and say, this is how we must tackle it. And I think there is a big case, as we can see, for starting doing that across different levels. Of course, the national level, the regional level, and also to work through community and municipalities and so on, trying to find these societal, so to speak, bottlenecks and work through it.
So I have 3 main points, but the first one is coming also from conversations with policymakers and others, people in industry and many like us. There is nothing inevitable in AI, especially, or in any technology. So thinking that the discourse of the very, basically the big techs that are much larger than entire countries, like various times, we have the power to decide truly, what we want in these technologies, how we want to use it. And it's very surprising how little, agency a lot of individuals, have, even, among the most educated ones. Regarding the second point I wanted to make has to do with political courage. I have to disagree there, because when you see regulations like the Digital Market Act of Europe, and how well crafted it is, and how well they try to tackle very powerful organizations regulated ex ante because of many of the problems you issued, very much because also the, I would say, limited economic theory that can apply to a lot of these digital platforms. We see that these are truly very potential actions that can regulate for better. And I see political courage when, even in the landscape we have these days with the trade wars and all the very well described situations, the European Union is still in March issued, Apple and Google, potential threats to actually fine them. And this time the fines are not, like just the 0.0001% of the revenue, but they can go up to 10%. My big question there is to what extent these are enforceable. So I see also in the EU Act, with which is the European Union artificial intelligence. I think it's the first regulation. Of course, Rush. There is also this race of who regulates first, and you see it in a lot of countries, very much not acting together, with imperfections. There was also political courage in how to put this safety, with a lot of problems, right? But so I think that we also have to give more credit to those that are there to stand against, as I said, companies that are much, much larger, with an immense political power and lobby to actually even threaten a lot of the politician crafting this. So I would like to make that. The very short last point, especially when it comes to the Global South, to me, the number one recommendation is invest in public infrastructure. And that seems very obvious, but it's not. Thank you.
Just to say, of course, I like the people who are, the courageous people who are doing something, whether it be the AI Safety Act, GDPR, all of these things are singularly in leading. I'm thinking more, Keir Starmer and the rest of the people in various center-left European parties who want to just sort of ride the coattails of Facebook to...
whatever.
Yeah. So...
Yeah, and if I may add another point, I think regulation is, of course, very important. I mean, it's one of the few things that the EU has done well, so at least we'll keep that. But I think at this point, we also need more ownership and more capacity and direct intervention of public authorities, I think, at continental level, because of this dwarfism that we have in Europe. Like Letta in the report, More Than a Market, refers to it as size deficit, which is perhaps not a very fortunate phrase, but it's evident that we want many small alternatives. Small is beautiful, but also we need great, gentle giants. And in Europe, we have done it with state-owned enterprises or part state-owned enterprises. We have a blueprint for that. We could do that at continental level. We live in a world of megastates. China, the US, Russia partly, probably India in the future. If we want to be in the league, we need also that, because not having very large actors that could be partly publicly owned, we are not really playing at scale, I think.
Can I add just one more thing? I have some doubts regarding the ability to stop the development and uptake of AI. While I strongly believe that innovation is endogenous to what society wants it to be, and we should really play on that, and we should try to steer technological progress. It really feels that the genie is out of the bottle when it comes to AI in itself. How are you going to tell people not to use AI at this point?
Do we have time to do it?
Maybe we open it.
At this point, I think it's to open to the audience. Really excited to hear the comments. I'm sure there will be informal possibilities afterwards. But for now, I'd love to see. All right. Interesting.
I didn't really want to go. I can't.
It's okay for the online.
I didn't really want to go first because I have a feeling I'm going to be like Banquo at the feast. When one's looking to the future, my gut feeling is when I'm listening to people like you, is to check your first concepts rigorously. And you got them all wrong. Technology does not naturally expand. Steam engines were invented about 100 BC, and they didn't expand. Sovereignty is not land-based. If you lived in the Roman Empire and you came across a Roman, you knew sovereignty was not land-based. Romanus sum, have you forgotten your Bible? So that was a warning to me. Then you are the problem. The academic technology, the academic perception is one of the major obstructions to change, not the physical technology. You go around the third world and people repeat, we can't do it unless we have lots of money. There's no truth to this. I know it because I was involved. Streaming was an amazing time because I met the people who invented streaming. I said, what you're doing is going to change the world. They said, join us. So I did. 3 months later, they said, we have to stop work for 2 weeks. I thought, why? So, we've got exams. I was a partner in a city firm. I didn't know everybody else on the project was students. So I was right there. If you knew the original world of technology, of the internet, it was 50% black. There's no black person here. That technology in the States was 50% black. As soon as the technology started to make money, the black people were exited. The same thing happened in Britain. Now, you're meant to be scholars. Talking about the technology and the history of it, either you know or you are complicit in continuing to create this image that technology is white, it's created by big money, when it's not true. So if you're living in a third world, I know you meant it sincerely, but the idea that what we need is to create infrastructure is like telling a third world country, you need more railways because how can we get your raw materials to London? You need more infrastructure. How can Netflix sell this stuff if you don't have it? So what I would say is that you're not actually aware that you are the problem. And you say, oh, well, what about the big guys? You are meant to be the leading critical edge.
Do you have a question?
No. Do you have a response?
We might bundle a few at the same time.
Hi. I'm going to respond with a sort of twofold question that it touches on a couple of things that people have said about putting the genie back in the bottle in some sense, about the effects of AI. And I'm extremely pessimistic because I see there is a element of barbarism that's out the bottle, and I don't know if it can be put back in. It's twofold. One is the cultural effects, as we're now seeing, of mass technology, of dependence on your phone, of when you're teaching students, and that's the most obvious thing for academics, but it goes far beyond that. Go to artistic production, the fact that people think these AI chatbots are like God. You ask it a question, you've surrendered your brain to it, it gives you an answer. like the cultural effects of that on a population, the loss of critical thinking and the ability to control, and the fact that we know in terms of sovereignty, these are platforms which are controlled by in a national context that give you things, and the manipulative effects are going to be terrible, and it's going to be really hard to deal with. And then secondly, which is something that you haven't brought up, in terms of non-state actors, and you're already seeing it now, and those who study these things are seeing it, is the golden age of organized crime like never before is upon us. It's been automated, it's in your phone, it's in your life every day. Your email is full of people trying to scam you. Every call you get, you normally assume if it's from an unknown number, that's a scammer that's sitting somewhere in a different country. It's automated. You have the monetization of like anything that's foul that gets a thing on social media platforms. We have organized crime using drones to get over borders. Like, this is out there, it's happening. The governance effects, the loss of control. States are not even beginning to take it seriously in terms of any response. And in some ways, what we see, and you can see it in parts of the global south, is that if right now, just restoring a measure of protection for your citizens and control in the sense of physical control over areas from these things are going to happen at the same time as complete loss of any sort of ability to regulate the devices you need for work every day. And I would like to wonder if you think maybe as pessimistically as I do in terms of the way to combat these sort of non-state actors, which as a big part of reclaiming digital sovereignty.
We're going to take one more question to bundle.
Sure.
Hi, thanks to our panel. My name is Naim, a PhD student here at the IPP, and I'm a Tech and Human Rights Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. So thank you for your topics this evening. My question is this, kind of looking at how digital sovereignty is being pursued, particularly looking at what's happening now in Europe and in other parts of the world. I'm also really interested in understanding to what extent are these pursuits dependent on the maintenance of maybe global structures that are fundamentally exploitative and extractive. The reason I ask is because I primarily look at the African continent, East Africa in particular. And so I wanted to understand, in terms of this vision of digital sovereignty as it's being pursued, how will it change those structures? And what might it mean particularly for African countries? Thank you.
So I will start because I'm the convener of this event. So I will address your points. I'm Argentinian. It's true that in this group of people, there are no Black people, also no Asian, for instance. And we can probably name a lot of different minorities or majorities that are still absent. If you see the panel, you will see that most of us are Spanish speakers. And you will see that most of us do not come from the UK. I think that nobody was born in the UK. You, no, not even you, no. So it's true, it's not as diverse as it could be, and it's certainly not that diverse because it is very much connected to the people I often work with. And because of, among others, language barriers, I ended up working with a lot of Spanish speakers. So I think that, although I'm super sympathetic to your comment, I think it's not the right place to make it, because it's true that there are no Blacks in this table. But no, I don't think it's not important. I think it is important. I think that we definitely need to discuss it. And I don't want to sideline a comment that to some extent is saying that this roundtable is racist. And I'm sorry, I listened to you very carefully, and I also did it. I listened to you very carefully, and I was also very nice in deciding that I was going to comment and reply your question. If you allow me, I may also say other things about the rest of what you've said. I also think that nobody in this table thinks has a techno-solutionist way of thinking. The other way around. In our report, we make it very clear that it's very dangerous to think that the major challenges that we are facing can be solved with technology. And at the same time, we think that we cannot be blind at the fact that technology definitely occupies a place and can be used and can be put at the service of solving problems. So I think that the answer to your sort of debate, Amir and Fausto, is neither one nor the other. I think we need to put AI on its place. AI will not solve all the problems. Definitely, it will not solve the ecological crisis, but we can think of how AI can be used for certain specific solutions and help us in certain specific things. At the same time, and trying to go to what Naya was saying, I think that at least the way I'm approaching, in particular in Latin American governments, progressive governments that want to do something about digital sovereignty, is definitely not only about digital infrastructure, because I agree that if you just tell a government expand the internet connection, that will most likely lead into more subordination to big tech. This is also why the solution that is called digital public infrastructure, which is promoted among others by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and that basically states that we need simply what the digital transformation is ultimately about a digital ID and e-payment solution and data exchange. Only this by itself is highly problematic, because all this ultimately will land on the cloud of Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. This is why we need comprehensive solutions. And this goes also to your comment, because it seems that we are stuck between a rock and a hard place, because we don't want cyber attacks, but who has the best cybersecurity software? Microsoft. So what are states going to do? What are we going to do? Are we going to be at risk all the time of cyber attacks and the organized crime? Or are we going to be under the risk of being completely subordinated to Microsoft? So definitely we need to produce another alternative. And what we are trying to do here is by no means to bring the solution automatically or think that us as scholars, we can be the ones that enlighten all the rest of the world. The other way around, I think that we want to share our thoughts and we want to work together with all the others from all the different spaces that want to make this alternative a reality.
To your point about the genie is out of the bottle kind of a thing, right? Did I get your comment right? Please correct me here, that because it exists, it cannot be tamed.
No, it's because sorry.
Okay.
Just to clarify, I'm saying the social effects are so negative that it makes the urgency of effectively trying to come up with some sort of response right now, not only very urgent, but incredibly difficult, because we're going to see exactly how difficult it's going to be organized against it.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I think one of the ways I would look at it is, if technology is shaped by social and political factors, it could be in a way curtailed, so it doesn't feel like there is no alternative. There is always an alternative, right? I mean, historically, if you look at nuclear power, for example, there are ways in which it has been controlled for certain means or to certain individuals. But what I'm kind of more interested when I raise that question is, there is a way in which we could guide it, which is Cecilia's point, that we could definitely guide it to certain aims that we want as a society, rather than tech or the tech bros can decide what we do with it.
Maybe you can address a little bit the point that Nai was raising, to which I'm very sympathetic. I think that it is really important that this techno-nationalism and these initiatives don't result in the same structures that we have seen. Like at the European level, we wouldn't want European big tech, at least not the European analog of what happened in the US. That's very much a concern. And the answer to that would be similar to the point that I was making earlier with regards to my advice to policymakers. That would be to create devices for value creation through openness and decentralization. I personally believe that there is a trade-off sometimes between centralization and closeness and the ability to create value. I think that much of the innovation in the internet came from the edges, came from grassroots work. And I think that if we are to address power concentration in the digital world, we should create a system that is more open, and this should be the foundation of the initiatives, both at the European level and elsewhere. With regards to whether there are specific plans that involve Africa, I'm not able to answer that directly. I know that when it comes to alliances and cooperation, Europe has, like some European initiatives have made it explicit that they don't want to sort of emulate the sort of extractive alliances that have been pursued, for example, by China when it comes to raw materials and these sort of things. And in that case, that was mentioned explicitly. But I am sure that more can be done in that regard.
Great. We have 9 minutes left, so...
I want to say something very, very short tonight, very, very short, because I also wanted to reply to that, and then I got distracted with the digital public infrastructure, which is a different battle. I'm sorry, Nai. No, I just wanted to say also, and to some extent tackles your question, that by no means we try to solve things by ourselves. So on May 26th, I'm co-organizing with Chile's Ministry of Science a workshop with policymakers from Chile, from Colombia, from Mexico, from Brazil, and from Uruguay to discuss about digital sovereignty in Latin America. So the first thing that we have to do is to discuss with them, not to try to build here the solution of what they should be doing. The second thing is to try to think collaboratively, regionally, internationally. Of course, also it's not just among those in Latin America, but really I think that because the challenge is huge, because as Carla was saying, these companies are bigger than states. They are bigger than national economies. So clearly, no single government, not even Brazil, which is the largest economy in South America, will be able to do it by itself. So I think that helping them to find these spaces where they can share what they are doing, the problems they are facing, and try to find collectively solutions. And there is one example, very concrete, that I think is very good, which is about the sustainability requirements for the installation of data centers. If it's not possible to forbid the installation of data centers, and there is still installing these data centers in Latin America, at least they need to comply with certain sustainability requirements and use the latest technology, not the shitty technology that they cannot use in Europe. And to do this, the governments need to coordinate, because the government that is the most advanced in this, which is the Chilean government, is now feeling the pressure of the other governments, or actually of the companies telling them the other governments do not require us the same sustainability requirements. And actually the Chilean government wants to ask for even more. So I think that if they work together, they can all together at least ask for more. Will this solve the problem? No, definitely not. But it will show a path. It will show a way to collaboratively work together to make things a little bit better.
Thank you. I think we have time for 3 brief questions.
Thank you for giving Asian a chance to ask a question. I'm trying to be very simple. For the report you have been written, or probably finished already, do you have any chapter focus on the name, why digital sovereignty, the name is appropriate or not? The reason why I'm asking that is, from politics, they make policy by clouding our minds. So as a policy maker, if we're trying to make some policy happen, I think we need to do it another way around, to call the true name of the things. Just one specific example and I'll finish. When I use Facebook, it's called Facebook, but I know Meta is a totally different thing. When you use Red Note, it's a famous Chinese social media, but Chinese name that in a very obvious way is actually Little Red Book. That's a little thing we use in Cultural Revolution. Chinese #1 TV station is called CCTV. So kleptocracy, policy making, they make the job down by naming things and renaming things. So we should call out the true name. What are the true name of digital sovereignty? What are the solutions? What are the name? Why Russell Square? It's obviously a circle, but we call it square. It's really a circle, right? It's not a square. Why is it called? Okay, I finished.
Thank you. We have a gentleman in the back.
Hi, I work in data governance in Africa, And we've talked about data sovereignty for a long time, and deal with cross-border data flows, and maybe you've dealt with digital sovereignty. There's a lot of grumpy people in the data and statistics international community at the moment thinking the digital crowd are stealing all the attention and the money. And I think there's become a bit of a tension between sort of a split between sort of looking at data issues and digital issues, and rather than taking a more holistic approach to that. I mean, I've just been working a bit on the DPI stuff for the G20, and realizing there that it has been taken over by just a straight technical approach. And you've got a very strong argument coming from South Africa at the moment to saying equity is the important issue. And equity is about people and their data and their ownership.
We have time for one further question.
Two more.
Okay.
But be quick, no interventions, just questions.
Hello, I think about AI and cybernetics. The South American point of digital public infrastructure, if you look at Stafford Beer's work with Alendi in 1971-72, maybe there's a clue in there, and his viable systems model. And secondly, I found Bitcoin and Ethereum 12 years ago, and I wrote a piece on it. And I said, if you disintermediate the currency, do you disintermediate the state? That was one point. But I'm really interested in the emerging agenic economy, which is upon us now. When every person has their own AI-powered avatar, which they control, a complex adaptive system agent, will that disintermediate the cloud and also disintermediate big tech?
I think that's it. One more.
Hey, thanks.
And it will be our final word at the same time. There will be no final words after the answers to the question.
Hey, my name is Bhargav. I'm at the Autonomy Institute. I've fairly I think the reason why Keir Starmer and everyone else is chasing after AI is because it's a silver bullet for productivity, and especially scientific productivity. Like whenever you go to any of these Microsoft is really wanting to hammer in that. But then there's not enough evidence that it actually brings these productivity boosts. So is there a potential economic intervention which even maybe liberals will kind of get on board with? Just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Maybe it's hard to remember all the questions. I'm just going to riff. I mean, the evidence is I was working on a report about digital automation before AI was the big zeitgeist, and the productivity statistics didn't reflect this great boost that is supposed to happen after each industrial or technological revolution and so on. But at the same time, the productivity increases that did happen were in industries that were very technologically concentrated, right? And there's papers that show there's a big boost in sort of customer service because of the chatbots and the upskilling. And I mean, the problem with measuring productivity is more of a academic debate among economists anyway, because it doesn't necessarily have that great of an impact on most people's lives, especially when the people that are doing this sort of AI revolution or implementing it in their business are a fraction of the vast majority of businesses. And a Digit just put out a report about, the use of digital automation technologies and, AI, and the number of people that are actually adopting and integrating these is really, really small in the UK and probably in Europe as well, given Germany still likes paper, and you have lots of other countries that are France as well, right? And that's partially because you have industrial sovereignty. You have they want to support these industries that have strong collective bargaining agreements that have and they can say no to technology. Saying no to technology is asserting a degree of sovereignty, right? A worker sovereignty. So is there a kind of way to undermine Starmer's like silver bullet idea? I don't really know. It seems like they'll push ahead regardless of the evidence politically, but you know that has opportunities in other realms. Maybe thinking about infrastructural autonomy and sovereignty. I mean, my reference point also is Allende and like Stafford Beers and this sort of Cyberzin and various kinds of like sketchings out of what could be. I think technology begets technology, and it's also socially shaped, and that means that we have quite a lot of way to go to sort of undo the path dependency, right? You know, you can't just decide that the plug socket is going to be different because you found an innovative way to plug things in. That's just not going to happen, right? But that means also because we're at this sort of turning point, I do think we are, around the infrastructuralization of AI, we can choose to say no, and we can try to cultivate cross-national solidarity in order to try to think about social cost versus social benefit and what that means. I don't think that everyone is going to have an agentic AI. I think some people will and some people don't. I think that's the sort of Silicon Valley dream, much like the idea that Bitcoin will take over the world or something like this, right? I don't think that's going to happen. I'm going to wrap up. Yes, I'll hand it over to whoever's next.
Oh, no? No? You?
I have no good answer for anything. No, I think that ultimately it all comes down to the fact that, I mean, these technologies, on the one hand, they promise autonomy, and the agentic autonomy may be that, but the autonomy of subjects, paradoxically, the individual point of connection operates in interaction with macro systems, right? That are always larger and larger, and where the monopoly tendency becomes bigger and bigger. And I think that it is really where I think that the most profound and democratic meaning of sovereignty lies, because sovereignty in the past was both the power of the king over the subjects, and it became democratic when it was realized that you could reclaim that power from below, from the citizenry, but only uniting around something. Right? So I think that very much this is where the imaginary of platforms, the imaginary of very large infrastructures can be reclaimed as a weapon of the weak, no? That once united, they can face up with large power.
And just following up on that, I think that this leads us to what type of digital technologies we need. The digital technologies that are developed today make us more individualistic. Think of what you were saying about your individual AI, that is your agent that works with you individually, and highlight the individual features because they profile, they customize the control over workers, over us as consumers. So instead of that, what about thinking of developing digital technologies that, as control technologies, instead of being used to control others, are collectively, democratically used to control our experiences. And I think that's the challenge. And I think that what you are saying, going back to these experiences that failed, like Allende, because I'm Argentinian, so I always say Allende, and Cyberzine are very important. We also record it, so no worries, you don't need to record it. Everyone can watch it live afterwards. But and going to what you were saying, and I want to say one word about that, I think that is not, I don't actually think that states ultimately are the ones that craft the narratives today. More and more states' narratives are basically a repetition of what companies have been whispering on their ears. So what we also need to break is that connection. What we also need to do is to realize that these large corporations also control the narratives and perceptions, not only of individuals, and which is also why for a lot of people having AI on their WhatsApp might be good, even if for me also it's a complete pain. But at the same time, this shapes the perceptions and what people in government think. And this is Starmer 101, with his deep friends from Microsoft and Amazon now sitting in decision-making powers, in decision-making positions in this government.
Just one quick final word. I really like your point about naming the things right. And I kept wondering many years why we focus so much on privacy while these companies were acquiring so much power. Of course, part of my methods involved studying discourse and how they become hegemonic and they legitimize many things that were not there. I don't think I understood from your comments that that's governments. But you were saying, more in general, how to name these things, right? And there is something very critical about that. And I always come back to the point that there is nothing inevitable about this. But when you look at the narratives of many of these companies are precisely suggesting if you do not go in the wagon of this new technology, you're going to be underdeveloped. So coming back to your point earlier on, I couldn't agree more. And when you're saying like we have the assumptions wrong, most of us, especially from what we are constructing, our research is precisely not taking a techno-deterministic view, what is so-called in academia, but very much thinking that these technologies are here to be adopted and you like it or not. It's exactly the opposite where we're coming from. So I think there was maybe a sort of a misunderstanding there. And I really value your points and, being critical. Coming from, and sorry, I'm taking longer than what I expected, but this is probably one of the most critical groups that you would encounter. And especially, me going in policymaking summits or other types of conferences, you would hardly see the criticality that were put here. So I'm very surprised that you took that, as, we are the problem. So I was like, we are like the very small percentage of academia really trying to raise some criticality here. Having said that, there were very important points to brought, and I think we still have to do, more in bringing this criticality against, this very powerful discourses. Thank you.
I can also thank you for your point. Thank you for your brave of showing our academic privilege. I'm wearing that weight every day in my life, and I'm not doing that from a victimistic perspective. I'm very aware about my privilege, and I try to work with my privilege. And I found very brave that you were here, you took the lead, and you say you're part of the problem. So thank you for remaining us again. And I'm not saying that I'm saying that in a very honest way. In my understanding, AI was originated by white people because there was this summer school in the 1954. Where 10 white academic in the US, they decided to coin the word and the concept of artificial intelligence. And it's true that, that doesn't mean that AI is made by white people, because there are a lot of black people doing AI, for instance, Timmy Gebru. And she was fired because she was challenging Google's AI, right, with that paper. So I wanted to also acknowledge that. And then last thing I wanted to say is whether we can have digital sovereignty, given that the minerals that are needed for this technology are in certain territories that won't have this sovereignty. Because if states want to develop their own technology, they will have to take these minerals from these territories. And we have the case of Ukraine. And yeah, that's it.
Maybe just a very short one. Just acknowledging your comment, if I understood well, I found it very interesting, and I think it connects with the first part of your answer, the idea of how we look at what technology brings, but also how we try to find solutions at the problems they bring, not from a technocentric point of view, but more from what is that we're trying to solve, right? I understood that was your comment. Totally agree, and I think that partly answers one of your questions before in terms of policy making, that the courageous policy making, it's not only about, in a sense, putting patches, trying to contain risk, but also thinking beyond that, what sort of technologies we want for what. So first thinking, what do we want? And then seeing how technology can support that. And also in the way we frame the problems that technology brings. instead of starting with the technology, what are those problems that we're trying to address? So thank you very much for the comment here.
Well, I'll just make a very quick comment, just to problematize a little bit the experience of Stafford Beer with in Chile. Stafford Beer, the experience we're talking about was an attempt in Chile to kind of use the latest technological tools in the 80s. I can't remember the years. 70s. In the 70s. And they were way ahead of time, and they brought to Chile this very famous consultant, Stafford Beer, who was also a pioneer of the field of cybernetics, and it was this beautiful, interesting attempt to sort of manage the economy using these new technologies. I think that in general, in the constant dialectic between public and private, it is very important that the public is not behind the private when it comes to the adoption of technologies. However, while we might agree when we like the specific government that the government tries to take a more hands-on approach and adopt certain control technologies and cybernetic technologies using the jargon, I wonder whether they might create problems when we don't like the government. On the other hand, we would rather have a government that is a little bit more detached. So that there will be a problem that comes with the sort of state-driven centralization of technologies.
Okay, I think we are ready. Thanks everyone for being here. I think that what this highlights is that, of course, this is part of an ongoing conversation. We, as scholars, are dedicating more of our time to intervene publicly, politically, to address these things and to try to find collectively a solution. It's not that we are just sitting on our desks and enjoying the fact that we're being hired by UK universities, either in a fixed-term position or permanent position, and just waiting until the summer comes and going on holidays in August. We are really thinking about what can be done differently. This is an open invitation to join us and to continue discussing with us and to share your ideas. And as I was saying before, I couldn't be happier to have you all here at IIPP. Thanks a lot for being here today, your comments. Thanks everyone here. Also, I'm so sorry for the people online. We didn't have time to address also their questions, but we are already beyond 7 p.m., so we should definitely end it up here. For those here, let me invite you upstairs for some drinks. And again, thanks a lot for being here, everyone.